been reduced. My granddaughters and my daughter have a lot more opportunities open to them than were true for the classmates of my high school graduating classmates, the women in my high school graduating class. We've made progress, not enough, of course, we all know that, but we've made some progress on racial inequality. Of course, we have more to do there, but it would be wrong not to recognize there's been progress over the last 50 years. We have niftier telephones than we used to. So there are a lot of good things that happened, but I want to focus on some big things that have gone wrong in our country over the last 30 or 40 years. And that's what I say I'm going to start at the 30,000 foot level at this. The most important big thing that's happened over these years is that we have become a more class-divided society. Much more class-divided society over the last 30 or 40 years. Part of this we all know because it's been what we've been talking about in the political campaign this year. That is the distribution of income in America is much less equal now than it used to be. If we imagine lining up all American families along this wall here with the folks who've done really well over there, sorry, that's going to be the rich end of the room, and over against the wall is Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, and then we come down among the pretty affluent folks, and then down here, I'm sorry, this is going to be the poor end of the room, up over there on the far wall are homeless people. And what's happened over the last 30 or 40 years is that the folks over there have done really well. But the folks from about here, about the middle, down to the bottom of the income distribution haven't had a raise, basically, in the last 30 years. And that is for a lot of different reasons. As I say, we've been talking about that as a country now for the last 2 years or so. It's partly globalization, it's partly automation, it's partly public policies, a lot of different reasons why that happened. But I'm not going to spend more time talking about that, not because it's not important, but because that part of the story I think we're all more or less familiar with. It's a less equal society in terms of income. But what's less often recognized and actually more important is that we have also become a more segregated society than we used to be. Segregated by social class. We're not segregated as much as we used to be by religion. We used to have Catholic neighborhoods and Protestant neighborhoods and Jewish neighborhoods, but now we're all jumbled up together. We're even somewhat less segregated in racial terms than we used to be, but we're much more segregated in social class terms. Increasingly, we either live in rich enclaves with other rich folks, or we live in poor enclaves with other poor folks, and fewer of us are living in mixed or moderate income neighborhoods. I'll show you a picture in a moment that will show you how that's happened across the country. And what follows from that is that increasingly our kids are going to school, if we're relatively well off and affluent, our kids are going to school almost entirely with other affluent kids, or if we're not so well off, our kids are going to school mostly with other poor kids, and fewer of our classrooms are there places where kids encounter people from the other side of the tracks. If you're on one side of the tracks, almost all the kids you go to school with are from that side of the track. And that has powerful implications. It affects this divide, this physical divide of our society between affluent folks and less affluent folks, affects everything. It affects whom we encounter. It even shows up in intermarriage rates. Now, intermarriage rates are a kind of an interesting sociological measure, fundamentally because we tend not to marry people that we haven't met. Hey, I didn't know that at 8:30 in the morning that was a joke, and I'm glad you got it. By that I mean, if we see intermarriage across some social line intermarriage increasing, like for example across religious lines, where interfaith marriages are much more common than they used to be, and that's basically because kids in their marriageable years, in their teens and 20s and 30s, are more often encountering people from a different religion, and sometimes sparks fly. And the same thing is true for interracial marriage. Interracial marriage is up, and that reflects the fact that we have made some progress in integration of kids in their teens and 20s and 30s, and therefore sometimes people meet and fall in love across the racial lines. And conversely, the fact that marriage across social class lines is dramatically falling. That is, people from affluent home backgrounds now mostly only marry other people from affluent backgrounds. And similarly at the low end of the spectrum, and what that means is, what that reflects is, we're just not ever meeting people from across we're very divided as a country. And that has powerful implications for the future of our society, actually. And the final thing that's happened is that the family and community bonds, which used to be very strong in the working class in America, have begun to crumble over the last 30 or 40 years under the impact of these earlier changes. I want to show you just a couple of pictures of how, graphs and charts. If you don't like numbers, that's fine. Just close your eyes and settle back, and your neighbor will wake you when we get to an interesting part. So, let's see if I can get this to work. On the left-hand side of the chart there, you see where we've lived over the last 50 years, depending upon what kind of neighborhood we live in. In the top part, the darker parts of those bars, the left bar is 1970 and the right bar is 2009. The dark bar up the top, the dark fraction of the bar up the top shows increasingly more and more Americans are living in affluent neighborhoods. Those are affluent folks living in affluent neighborhoods. And the bottom, the lightest part down at the bottom, are the people living in impoverished neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods, and more of us are living in either rich neighborhoods or poor neighborhoods. And in the middle, you can see fewer and fewer of us are living in mixed or moderate income neighborhoods. That just sort of shows how dramatic these changes have been. On the right-hand side of the chart there, we have another measure of the ways in which the family and community bonds that used to be pretty strong in the working class in America have begun to crumble. You can see, this is a chart of the fraction of kids who are living in single-parent families. All kids. This is not broken down by race. This is all kids, black, white, brown, so on. And the bottom line shows that there's been very little change in the fraction of college-educated Americans whose kids are living in single-parent families. It was about 7 or 8%, then it rose a little bit in the divorce era of the 1980s, but then it's down a little bit, so it's now about 8%, 7% maybe. But the fraction of kids from high school educated homes who are living in single parent homes has risen from about 18% up to nearly 70%. And I want to be clear, so there's been a big change in the family structure in the working class in America. And I want to add a couple of points just so you don't misunderstand me. I'm not making a moral point about that. I'm certainly not blaming the moms. They're mostly single moms, and I'm certainly not blaming them. If anybody, I might be inclined a little bit to blame some of the dads who are not there anymore. But the main point is not a moral problem. It's that what we know, frankly, from the data, and this is something on which liberals and conservative experts all agree now, it's easier to raise kids if there are two parents in the home. I'm not trying to say, we all know, I know personally, in my own family, single moms who are doing a bang-up job against a lot of odds. So I'm not trying to make this a point about the faults of the single mom. What I am trying to say is, it's easier to raise kids with two parents. Kids do better if they have two parents, especially boys do better if there's a father in the household, a stable father in the household. And that reflects a collapse of the working class family. That trend got noticed first many years ago among African American families, and at the time people attributed that to race, but it's not about race, it's about social class, because as President Obama said, I've been talking about this, sorry, I'm name dropping, I apologize for that. In order to become a professor at Harvard, you have to pass a test in Navy opinion, so I'm trying to show him a little bit, legitimate Harvard professor. So the way he puts it is, the effect of hard times on families, first of all, hit the African American family because they were at the bottom of the economic hierarchy. But when the same hard times began to hit the white community, the white working class, the same collapse of the white working class family happened. It's not about race, it's about hard times and the effect of that on family structure. Pardon me. And So those are the big changes that have happened. Let me remind you again. The big changes are, first of all, we're less equal economically. Secondly, we're more segregated economically. And third, the family and community structure in working class neighborhoods has deteriorated over these periods. And what I want to ask now is, so what? What are the effects of those big changes on kids? And social scientists can be divided into two categories. I'm a social scientist. The counters and the storytellers. And I'm basically a counter, and if you like data, just wait. There's going to be a lot of nice graphs and charts. But I'm going to start with a story. I'm going to start with this, because the story that I'm going to tell you is a story that I think captures a lot of these changes. I'm going to tell you the story, the history of a small town in the middle of America. It's on Lake Erie in Ohio. It's a town called Port Clinton, Ohio. Port Clinton in the 1950s. We're going to start in the 1950s. Port Clinton in the 1950s was a town of about 5,000 people, mostly white folks. A couple of non-white people in town, but basically white folks. It was a town, I know the town pretty well because it's my hometown. And so I want to tell you the story of my hometown. And just trust me, I wouldn't be inflicting my hometown story on you if it didn't happen that it turns out to be relevant, actually to Bridgeport as well as the rest of America. So Port Clinton in the 1950s was a kind of a modest place. Of the parents of my high school classmates, high school class of 1959, the parents of my classmates, nearly half of them had not themselves completed high school. So this is a very modest place. In other words, half my classmates were the first in their family to graduate from high school. The dads of my classmates worked on the assembly line in some local auto part factories, or they were fishermen on Lake Erie, or they had small farmers or small businessmen like my dad. But social class was not a big deal. At least we weren't aware of it being a big deal. And now, more than 50 years later, we can tell how the class of 1959 is done, because we're all mostly done. And how we've done is amazingly well. Almost 80% of us have done better than our parents. And even more dramatically, the folks from the kids from the right side of from the wrong side of the tracks have done just about as well as the kids from the right side of the tracks. How well we did in life, first of all, we all did pretty well, not because we're smart, not because we're great, but because of when we were growing up in the 50s and in the 60s. And the kids, we all did well, but the striking thing is how well you did turned out to depend on your own talents and your own God-given skills and your own hard work, but didn't depend almost at all on what your parents did or didn't do. And that's the core of the American dream, after all. The core of the American dream is how well you do should depend upon you and how hard you work and your talents, but shouldn't depend upon what your parents did or didn't do. And that's what's been changing in America and in Port Clinton, as I will say in a minute. So I got a scholarship from the local firm, went off to college, met a kid on what we then called co-ed, really smart. We're still hanging out together 6 years later. So far, so good. We had two kids. They both went to Harvard and went on to they're now successful professionals. They had 7 kids altogether between them. So my wife and I have 7 grandchildren. I want to show you the pictures of our 7 grandchildren. Later, come up to me afterwards and I'll show you the pictures. And all of our kids are either in one of America's best colleges or universities right now, or they're on their way there. Miriam, our oldest granddaughter, that's the Miriam on the slide. Miriam is just about to graduate in a couple of weeks from a very good college. She's majoring in French literature. She spent, not last summer, but the summer before last, in Paris studying, or she told us she was studying French architecture and French cuisine. I'm sure about the French cuisine part. And we're super proud of Miriam and all of our grandchildren. Meanwhile, back in Portland, there was another guy, a year or two behind me. We both played on the football team, but because he was behind me, we didn't actually know each other. He we're going to call him Joe. Joe's actually not his real name, but he's certainly a real person. Joe graduated from Port Clinton High School, decided not to get a college degree, but to get a job in one of the local